Hello, everybody. All right, we're just gonna wait for everyone to join. Hi, Graciela. Hi, Phoebe. The Daily Sadhana. Hi. Okay, so can everyone hear me well? Just put in the chat if you can. This is also live streaming on YouTube. So if you want to watch from YouTube, you can also do that. All right, let me put some comment in here. Q&A. Ask me how to use storytelling in business. Hi, Isadora. Hi, Leo Waffles. Hi, Nihanis. Hello, everyone. Okay, welcome. Welcome. It's been a while since I've done a live. So this week in Night Owl Nation, we're talking about pattern recognition and connecting the dots between stories, connecting the dot between a story and a lesson, or connecting the dot between a story and a situation, or something like that, right? Hi, Nicole. Hi, Eduardo. Hi, Danny. So if you have any questions about, if you have a question about like how you can use storytelling in your business, put it in the question tab right here, and try to be as specific as possible with your questions. So I think the best way for me to help is, if I don't have to like ask follow-up questions, right? So try to see if you can ask more specific questions. So one of the things that I'm realizing right now, as I'm teaching storytelling, is, I've been studying a lot about comedy writing, like people who write comedy, stand-up comics and stuff like that. And the way we should practice storytelling as an entrepreneur is very, very similar to how stand-up comedians write jokes. And when somebody goes on stage, and when a comic goes on stage and they do their show, essentially what they're doing is they're telling their jokes, right? And their jokes are stories. And they have like they have already a set of jokes or stories written that they say it over and over and over, and they perfect it over time, and they're going on stage to tell those jokes and tying it into their set, right? And that's kind of what we're doing as an entrepreneur. Like yesterday I was speaking at an event, and so many people have come up to me afterwards telling me like how they enjoyed how I tied the stories to what I'm saying, right? So what you want to have is, you don't want to have just one hero's journey story, right? You don't want to have one brand story. You want a dozen stories that you can always, in your arsenal, that you can always use every time you need to say something, or every time you need to make a point. You can use these stories to make a point. Okay, so let's go into questions. So yeah, if you have a question for me, just put it in the question tab. And what you can also do is you can go in there and you can vote up you can like the questions that you like, and I'll answer those first, the ones at the top. Okay. The Amica brand. How can you use storytelling? Oh, if you have a question, can you please put it in the question sticker, so we don't lose it? Because like the chat moves, so it's hard for me to follow. Okay. The Amica brand asked, how can you use storytelling to grow your brand without being personal? Okay. So first thing I want to say is, no matter what you do, you're going to be personal. Right? Even if you're building a corporate brand or something like that, you have to bring personality into it. And that's why, like when these like social media is working so well, because they're like, whenever you comment on this or you post something, like you're showing a little bit of your personality. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like, you can see that about almost every big brand. Like if you see, like right now, what's happening is if you look at what Kylie Jenner is doing, right? She's she's putting out these products out there, but at the end of the day, people are buying it because of Kylie and her personality. So I would personally say you want to add as much personality into your brand as possible rather than trying to hide that, because otherwise it just becomes like a robotic brand, right? Now, there's a difference between personal and private, right? So you can be, so I think when people says, oh, you got to be authentic, like authenticity in your brand and things like that, a lot of people confuse authenticity with like privacy, right? Meaning, oh, I need to talk about everything in my life and everything personal that's happening in my life. That's just not true, right? Look, I rarely talk about any of my personal life or anything I do in personal, but I am being authentic in whatever I'm saying, right? I am bringing, like for example, let's say you want to talk about, AI. What's going on with AI, and how is AI going to affect your business? You have your personal opinion on that, right? And you should say that. You should bring your personal opinion to the table, because at the end of the day, that's what we're selling. Like all of, whether you know it or not, every single one of us, what we're doing is we're selling our opinions. Okay. I think AI is good for this. I think AI is bad because of this. Like whatever it is. I think I think iPhones are the best. I think Android phones are the best. I think this way about, the economy. I think this way about the economy. Whatever your opinion is what you're selling. And people are following you, people are buying your brand because they're on board with your opinion. They're on board with what you personally believe, right? So you can't really detach personality. Hey Joey, you can't really detach your personality from your brand. So I want to start by doing that. But what you can do in your storytelling is you can be vulnerable with your stories without giving away all your giving away all your what you call it, like your private life, right? You can personally give an opinion about AI, what you like about it, what you don't like about it, and you don't have to talk about your personal life, right? But you are still being personal because you're giving your personal opinion. So something like that, like that's how I would do it. So if I want to use storytelling, like a lot of times I think the way I use storytelling is I talk about, maybe I might tell a story about your clients, right? You can tell a story. Okay. If somebody comes to you and let's say for me, if a client comes to me and say, hey, I want to build this app, blah, 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 whatever it is, what I can do is, we've actually worked with these clients, and you can make it anonymous. We work with clients who is in the similar field as you, and this is what happened, and you tell a story about what happened, right? And the reason why I'm telling this story is, for example, okay, here's a good example. I'm going to give you a real life example. So I had a client who came to me and they wanted to build out a custom portal for their own membership community. And this project was going to cost like $120,000 and 6 months to build. Okay. And what I told them was, hey, we work with these clients who's like, much bigger than you. And we've actually attempted that project before. And what happened was we built a custom portal for this client who has 20,000 members. And what ended up happening is after 6 months, people were not logging onto that platform because they weren't used to it. And people just kept going back to Facebook because they already had Facebook in their phone. They had the notifications. They had everything already on there. So we ended up scratching that whole platform and ended up using Facebook anyway, right? So what I did was I told the story of the mistake that we made with another client. So I'm being vulnerable. And then why you shouldn't go invest all this money on building, and why you should just use Facebook group instead, right? Something like that. And by me telling that story, I can make, instead of just saying, hey, that's a waste of money, don't do it. If I just say that, it's kind of like I'm just saying, hey, believe me, right? like I'm right and you're wrong. But when you actually tell a story of what happened, that client is going to be more likely to listen to you. So that's an example of how you can use storytelling without being personal or sharing your personal thing. Before we move on, I also want to touch that, like, being vulnerable, being vulnerable doesn't mean like talk about all your problems, right? Like being vulnerable doesn't mean, hey, Rob, hi, Isadora, can you put your question in the sticker so I don't miss it? Yeah, so being vulnerable doesn't mean like airing your dirty laundry. Being vulnerable doesn't mean like oversharing. Do you know what I mean? Actually, when you're being vulnerable, you're sharing your weakness, like your character flaws of what you used to do wrong. Like that, I feel like whenever like I say I talk about vulnerability, people think vulnerability has something to do with tragedy. People think that vulnerability has something to do with, oh, this happened to me, woe is me, the world is not fair, and blah, 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 all these bad things that happened to me. That's what people love to talk about when they're being vulnerable. But vulnerability is not about what happened to you. It's actually about what you did wrong as a result of what happened to you, right? So, for example, let's say you had a business partner who backstabbed you and like fucked you over, right? People think that vulnerability is talking about, oh yeah, this guy did this and blah blah blah, and then we went, we were broke and blah, blah. Like that's what they think vulnerability is. But reality is like, oh, this person did this to me, but I should have seen it coming. It was my fault because I saw all the red flags, but I ignored it, and then afterwards I did this. So vulnerability is talking about your own flaws, your own shortcomings, your own what you did wrong, not what other people did wrong to you. That's not vulnerability. That's just playing the victim. That's just that's not vulnerable at all. Okay. Facific. How to convince someone, more particularly in a potential HR for a software potential hire. Are you trying to say hire? Potential hire for a software development role. That's a tough one. Like, so here's what I found when it comes to hiring. Okay. So many people. I'm not going to talk about hiring because I guess hiring is not really hiring, or HR is not really my it's not like my area of expertise. But here's what I'll say about, if you want, because hiring people, trying to convince good talented people to come work for you is also selling. Right? But here's what I realized. Okay, I'll give you my whole opinion on hiring and HR and things like that. So many people come to me, like business owners come to me and ask me, son, how do you find such great talent? Like, how do you compete with Google, and how do you compete with these big, amazing companies, like to attract talent, right? And here's the thing. It's really easy, actually, because what I'm looking for is, I'm not looking, first of all, what do you consider great talent? That's number one, right? So I'm not looking for the person who has the best Photoshop skills. I'm not looking for the person who has the best grammar in writing, or who can write the fastest, or that's not what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is an attitude, okay? So in Night Owl Nation the other day, we were just talking about, somebody was sharing about how she she doesn't like meetings, and she doesn't like that how everybody's late to meetings, they're unorganized. So she steps up to organize meetings, to remind everyone and things like that. And usually there are people like that. When you go on vacation or you go out to dinner with a bunch of friends, there's always that one person who's like the babysitter who controls the itinerary, right? They'll plan everything, and they'll call you to wake you up to make sure you're on time, and they're to make sure everybody's you know everybody's on the same page, and those the project manager type, right? The ones that takes care of shit, right? And everyone else is just staying there, whatever. They just go with the flow. They just do what they're told. They're not the one to step up and try to make things happen proactively, right? Most people are just reactive, right? Like another example is one time at Night Owl at my agency, like I was so stressed. I had so much shit to take care of. And the next morning I was flying out to Texas for a video shoot. And we needed the person that was the drone operator that was supposed to come with me, that they wanted to come with me, decided he couldn't go because he got sick. So I had to find somebody else to come with me. And I was stressed out because I don't know how to use the drone. And the person who was supposed to come with me, who was supposed to control the drone, wasn't like looking up or like trying to figure it out or anything. And I was just there kind of stressing out, freaking out. But then there was another developer who worked for me who has that kind of proactive personality. What he did was he recognized that I was stressed out. He recognized that I'm out of time. And he went to the closet, grabbed the drone, Googled how to use the drone. And then like he actually tested it all out, charged all the batteries, and then like made a step-by-step list of, okay, here's what you want to do. And he did that. He did that without me asking. Okay. Now that's what I'm looking for. That kind of attitude of when shit hits the fan, when there's a problem, when problem needs to be solved, when something needs to get done, are you just gonna fucking sit around and wait for somebody else to tell you to do something? Or are you gonna get off your ass, go Google it, and to be proactive and try to solve the problem, right? That attitude is what I'm looking for. Because if you have that attitude, I can teach you how to shoot. I can teach you how to fucking design. I can teach you how to copyright. I can teach you all of that shit in a matter of 6 months, as long as you have that attitude. So what I'm particularly looking for is I'm looking for that attitude. Okay. So that's a secret to how we hire great talent. We don't hire great talent. What we do is we hire people with great attitude, and we train them and we grow them and we turn them into great talent. Okay. So that's number one. But how do you get somebody to come work for you? Well, you don't. Here's what I found, right? Usually the people with that kind of attitude, that wants to be problem solvers, that want to make a difference, that doesn't want to just sit there and do manual labor. Like, I give you the direction here, design this with this style guide, use this color, use this font, and I just give them everything. And that person's just sitting there and just designing what I told them to do. Like, that person, those are the people you don't want to attract, right? But usually those are the people that want to work for a bigger company with benefits, with cushy salary, with all the all the process already done. They're the lazy ones. They're the ones who just want to hide away and just do the bare minimum, just enough to not to get fired, so they can collect their paycheck and live their life, right? So you don't want to attract those people. So one of the ways you can make sure you attract good talent is by not giving them all that shit. Okay? So what we do is we say, hey, we're not going to pay as much as Google. We're not going to pay as much as Ogilvy. You're probably not going to get all the fucking free lunch and all that fancy shit that like you get in those companies, right? But at the same time, if you work for this company, because we're a small company and everybody has to pull their weight, you are going to make a difference. We are going to use your ideas. You are going to work on projects that actually goes out and helps people, that goes out and helps brands, rather than you working on shit and then we throw it away because it was a waste and we kill the product. That's not going to happen, right? Because one of the ways you can, like, a lot of people that I mentor, a lot of people think that, the more you pay, if I just want to hire talented people and get them to do shit or design shit for me or make videos for me or something like that, I just need a lot of money and I just need to hire them and pay them a lot of money. And that's not how it works. Okay, trust me. Like, try to do that. Try to pay somebody a lot of money. All you're gonna do is waste a lot of money. What people want, what I found is most employees are not driven as much by money. I mean, obviously, as humans, we're all driven by money. But there's one thing that people are even more driven than by money, which is ability to make a difference. If I go into this job and I do this work, was it a complete waste of time? Am I just going there and fucking doing this manual labor that doesn't even mean anything? Or am I actually making a difference? If I make this website for this client, is it actually making a difference for the client? Is it actually making a difference for the world? So we want to know that the hard work, the blood and sweat we put into it is actually making a difference in the world versus imagine you go into a job every day and every single week they tell you to design an email template, and every week you design an email template and it doesn't get approved, so they just throw it away and they don't even use it. So imagine you do that for a year. Every week you're designing something, design, and every week they just throw it away. No matter how much money they pay you, you're not gonna last in that job because you're gonna get depressed. You're gonna feel like shit. You're gonna feel like you're useless, and that's gonna be the worst job. So, the real way to hire people is just to be honest with them, and I think show them that they are gonna make a difference. They're not just coming here to collect a paycheck or something like that. Fuck, so many questions here. Okay, I'm gonna have to go faster. Okay, HSC. Okay, Hamza asked the question. Son, should all our posts be about storytelling? What should be percentage on our posts? Okay, no, not all posts should be about storytelling, but what I do is I include story in everything I say. So before I was saying, what I'm starting to realize is that writing stories and coming up with stories a lot like how stand-up comedians write their jokes. What you want is you want to constantly have tons of stories that you can tell. And what I do is this, like, honestly, like if I go on a stage to talk, right, or somebody asks me a question, I have my answer. Somebody asks me a question in a panel, I have my answer that I want to answer, right? This is the answer. But if somebody asks me like, oh, son, what do you think of AI? And this is a real scenario. So yesterday they asked me like, what do you think of AI and how AI will affect the creative industry, right? And I could have just said, oh, I think AI is just a tool. So, whoever you are, you want to learn how to use the tools to, do it. And, AI is going to replace the average employees, like the average copywriter, average designer. AI is going to replace that. I could have just said that, right? That's a 15-second boring answer that nobody's going to fucking remember, right? So instead, what I want to do is like something like this. So I heard a story that when Steve Jobs first, when Apple first made the iPhone, they decided to use a plastic display because like a glass display can break, and once it breaks, the phone becomes unusable, right? Whereas with the plastic, even if it gets scratched up, you can still use it, right? So that's why logically they made the decision to do that. And last minute, Steve Jobs came in and said, no, we're going to change the display to glass. Why? Because if somebody drops their phone and breaks the glass display, they're going to blame themselves and they're going to say, oh, I dropped the phone by mistake. So I made the mistake. And they're going to pay the money to replace the phone. Whereas if it was a plastic display and it was like in your pocket and with your keys, it got all scratched up and you couldn't see because it got blurry, they're not going to blame themselves. They're going to blame the brand. They're going to blame Apple of making a shitty product, right? So that's why they decided to switch to the glass rather than plastic, even though plastic makes more logical sense, right? And that's just the thing. Steve Jobs had the brilliance to understand human beings and human psychology to know that, he had the sense to do that, right? So the the analogy that I made is, okay, imagine you had the same team designed the Apple iPhone, right? That Steve Jobs had. And you were managing that team and you were trying to give them directions to build a product. Would you have done it? Right? If I give you Steve Jobs' same team, can you build the same thing that Steve Jobs built? The answer is no, because you wouldn't even know what directions to give them. You wouldn't even know what to, you don't have the vision to tell them how to give the directions. And that's exactly what AI is. If you're sitting in front of a ChatGPT, you can have the smartest fucking AI working for you. You can have the smartest ChatGPT most talented ChatGPT in the world working for you. If you don't know what direction to give it, you're gonna lose. So I made the analogy of how AI is a lot like these talented designers, writers, and creatives that you can hire. Right now, you can hire them and create amazing shit, but you can't because you don't know what to say to them. Or for example, I know how to code, so I know to go to ChatGPT and say, hey, write me a script in JavaScript that creates this database with this fields and it filters by this. And I can give it the direction that I want. So for ChatGPT to write the code that I want. But can you? If you don't know how to code, can you use ChatGPT to write a software? No, you can't. And that's the story that I used to further push my point. I could have just made my point and that's it, but it would have just went in one ear and out the other. Nobody would remember. But by bringing in that interesting story and tying it to that, that's what you want to do. And the only way you can do that is you constantly have to be collecting stories. I heard that Steve Jobs story like a year ago from a podcast, and boom, and now I saved it, right? I'm like, I know I can use this story somewhere. I know when I try to make a point, I'm going to use this story, right? So what I'm doing is actually I'm collecting a lot of stories in my story bank, and I have hundreds of stories, right? And every time I'm trying to make a point, I use that story. Now, what you should be doing content is slightly different. So a lot of people think that your content, like the post that you post on Instagram or YouTube or whatever, that's the final piece of the content, right? No, that's not the final piece of the content. What I post on my Instagram, what I post on social media, those are just drafts. That's my practice run. I'm trying to use it's, and that's kind of how comedians do it. That's why there's so many similarities. What comedians do is they put out jokes on social media to test it out, to see if it works. Do people get it? Is this too confusing? Does this make sense? And you keep putting out content in your social media and you're just throwing everything on the wall to see if it works or not. So I'm trying all my hundreds of stories on social media, and most of them don't work. Most of them people don't get. But once something hits and once something goes viral and people are loving it, I know that's a good story for that lesson. Now I'm going to save it, right? And I'm going to keep retelling that story when I go on stage, when I talk in sales meetings, when I coach. I'm going to keep using that story. And every time I tell that story, it gets a little better. That story gets a little better, tighter, better. I know what words to use. I know which parts people like. I know which parts people get bored. So I'm constantly polishing that story until it becomes perfect. And I use social media to do it. I use the stage to do it. I use my coaching calls, my sales meeting. Every time I'm interacting with human beings and I'm telling stories, I'm using that platform to make my stories better. So think of it like that. Think of all the content as, let me try this story, see if it works. Oh, let me try this story, see if it works. And you're testing out your stories. I guess finally what I want to say is that's one of the reasons why we have small groups at Night Owl Nation. Because you can't just improve your stories in a vacuum. You can try to sit there and fucking write a story and then keep trying to make it better and better and better and better by yourself. I guarantee you it's not going to get better. And that's why comedians go on stage to test out their jokes. So for you to make your story better, What you actually have to do is you have to go out in the real world and you have to test out your stories. You have to tell your stories, get feedback, tell your stories, see how people react. So you need to keep doing that. And one of the ways you can do that is like in Night Owl Nation, we have small groups. So every week, people go to a small group meeting and they share their stories. And they kind of workshop their story with other storytellers and they get feedback. And through this process, you make it better. And then you go back to the drawing board and you rewrite the joke. You rewrite the story. And next time you tell it again. And then you get feedback and then you rewrite it. And that whole process is the real process of storytelling. I know that was like long answer again. Shit, sorry. Okay, Patsy Johnson asked, for life coaches, what is your advice if usually always sharing personal stories? I want to expand the storytelling without telling followers. What to do and just relate it back to my stories. Okay, let me read from the beginning. For life coaches, what is your advice if usually always sharing personal stories? I want to expand the storytelling without telling followers what to do and just relate it back to my stories. I guess my question is, how do I incorporate storytelling when it's not my own story? It's actually, no, that's completely fine. So most of the stories that I tell are not my stories. Like, I told that story with Steve Jobs. So that's a story that, okay, I'll put it this way. So that Steve Jobs story, that it teaches you that not every decision in business is logical, right? Or it can also teach you that, like, when you make a product, you have to balance between a good product and your brand name, your brand reputation, or something like that. I mean, there's could be multiple lessons in that story, right? But here's the thing. For me, I always start with my story first. I think here's my whole process. For me, in my life, I look at all the things that happen in my life and I try to reflect on it. And what ends up happening is when I go back and reflect on it, I start to notice patterns. I'm like, oh, I have a tendency to let my ego keep getting in the way. And every time I go to a sales meeting or something like that, what's up, Tyler? Every time I go to a sales meeting, or I'm in the meeting, or I'm hanging out with my friends, I have a tendency to want to win an argument. I want to be right? But then what I notice when I go back and reflect, I notice how many times when my ego that says, oh, I need to win this argument, or I need to be right, I need to prove this person wrong, how much that gets in the way of getting opportunities in business, right? So many times that's happened in my life. And I have so many stories, like specific stories where that's happened that I can tell, right? So the first thing is I reflect in my own life to make sure that this is really an important lesson that I learned in my life. And it's an important lesson that other people can learn in their life. If I see that a lot of other people are making the same mistake that I made, right? And that's essentially it, right? When you're teaching, when you're a coach, when you're trying to make content, when you're trying to give advice, what you're trying to do is you're trying to look at the dumb mistakes that you made in your life, all the stupid shit that you did in your life, and then how going back and reflecting in it and seeing what you did wrong. And then you want to show other people, other dumbasses who are doing the same thing that you were doing. And you're trying to show them, right? You're trying to teach them the way so they don't do the stupid shit. They don't make the stupid mistakes that you made, right? That's what you're trying to do. So for me, in order to do that, I first have to reflect on my stupid mistake. Why did I make those stupid mistakes? What is it about my personality? What is it about my ego, my emotions? What is it about me or humans in general that makes us make those stupid mistakes? And how I fixed it, right? So I look at all my story first. And then from there, whenever I watch a movie, whenever I see another situation where somebody's making that same stupid mistake, whenever I listen to an advice or podcast or story like Steve Jobs, whenever I see other situations where people are making that same stupid mistake or learning from the same mistake, then I tell that version of that story, right? That's not necessarily my story, but it's at the end of the day, it's the same story. It's just that it's not my story, right? But I know that that's the right story because I've been through it and I can relate to it. So to give you an example, here's an example. One of the things that I noticed is that I'm really good at keeping myself accountable, getting shit done, and like learning new shit and meeting my goals when I'm forced to do it. Like, for example, if I don't go to class every day, like my mom's gonna beat the shit out of me. So I have to go to class every day. If I don't go to job and I don't do this task, I'm gonna get fired. So I don't want to get fired, so I do it, right? If I don't meet this deadline, my client's gonna hate me, and I don't want my client to hate me, so I do it, right? But then whenever it came to my own stuff, when nobody was telling me to do anything and there's no negative consequences, I noticed that I become lazy. I'm like, oh, I'll do that next week. Oh, I'll do that next week. Oh, it's okay. There's no client or deadline, so I can that's just for me. So what I noticed is that a lot of us, myself especially, I'm really good at keeping promises when I made the promise to other people, but I'm really bad at keeping the promises that I made to myself. I'm not really a good friend to myself, right? That's what I noticed. That's a pattern I noticed. I recognized by reflecting on my life and that, right? And I started thinking about, oh, why is that, right? And then one day I heard Jordan Peterson talking about how, about zebras, right? When you see a zebra, why do zebras have stripes? Right? You ever wonder that? Well, zebras have stripes because it's a defense mechanism. So, and you might ask, like, what? Like, what kind of? That's the worst. That's got to be the worst defense mechanism in the world because when you have stripes, black and white stripes, it's so obvious. Like people can spot you, right? But the thing is, the reason why zebras have stripes is because it's a defense mechanism against themselves. So when you see a lot of zebras, right? You can't really hone in on one zebra. And that's why when somebody goes there and they mark a zebra with a red paint, and you can spot that one zebra, that zebra will end up dying because all the lions or the cheetahs or whatever the predators are going to be able to spot that one zebra, and they're going to be able to work as a team to hone in on that zebra and kill that zebra. And that's why zebras have stripes, right? Now, when I heard that, I'm like, holy shit, that reminded me of how that's kind of like how humans are, right? Like, we want to survive, and therefore we don't want to stand out, right? We want to kind of like go into the crowd, we want to hide in the crowd, and we don't want to stand out because the more you stand out, the more you become a target, right? And it's the same thing. Like, one time I went into a subway train where this guy was, this kind of like crackhead was like smoking a cigarette, and he the whole thing was like the whole train smelled like cigarette, and everybody's obviously bothered, but not one person said anything. Nobody said anything until a new person walked in. He's like, hey, you shouldn't smoke in here. And then that's when everybody started speaking up, right? Well, it's because as human beings, just like those zebras, we're not motivated by success. We're not motivated by, we're like, nobody wants to be Steve Jobs. Nobody wants to be Elon Musk. Nobody wants to be the one human being, the one zebra that stands out from the rest, that can be a target where everybody's targeting you, right? So okay, to kind of turn it all around, what I'm trying to say is this: all of those stories relate to the fact that as human beings, we're not really motivated by success. We're not motivated by hope. We're not motivated about getting something. we're motivated more by negative things. We're motivated by fear of failure. We're motivated about, oh, I don't want to get fired. We're motivated by, oh, I don't want to get attacked. We're more motivated by survival than hope, or to get to achieve something. That's what I realized. Okay, so here's the thing. That's an interesting lesson that I learned about life, and that lesson applies in many places, right? So you see how I'm connecting the dots. I'm connecting the dots between, okay, in my life, everything that I've achieved, I was motivated by fear, less about hope, right? And then I heard Jordan Peters talking about the zebras, and how like zebras, like most animals, most living things are motivated by survival, not hope. And then I saw that one story about the train in the subway, when nobody wants to speak up because nobody wants to stand out. All of those things, right? And if you look at all of those, it's very obvious that if you're copywriting, right? Let's say you want to sell your products, and you want to write copy for your sales page or something like that. I see a lot of people trying to, like, hey, imagine you can win $1 million. Imagine you can make $1 million, sit on the beach, and like make 10K a month, and they're trying to draw this picture of like millionaire lifestyle, or imagine like living this perfect life. Like people are trying to use hope, and they're trying to use like this vision and this positive messaging to sell a product. But what I'm trying to say is, if you look at all the stories that I've told you so far, people are not driven by hope. So if I went up to somebody and say, hey, wouldn't it be awesome if you can eat healthy, and you can eat healthy, and you can be healthy, and you can live a healthy, and you can live a very healthy lifestyle and feel great and all of that? Nobody gives a shit, because we're not driven by hope. Right? But if you went to somebody, say, hey, are you miserable because, like, nobody wants to date you because you're out of shape, and like you feel like shit, and like you feel lonely and all of that. You can fix that by just following this program and getting fit, and then once you're fit, all your problems will disappear. Like you use the negative, the fear. Like fear sells much more than hope, is what I'm trying to say. So that's when I realized, like, all of those lessons combined is when I realized that, like, most people are driven by fear more than hope. And when we write our copy, that's why we need to base our copywriting based on fear more than hope. Okay, something like that. So I guess I know that this was a long answer, but I guess what I'm trying to say is this: it's not about being personal in your story and telling a story that happened to you. What it's more about is understanding these emotions that you have, understanding these situations that you were in. How did you feel? And trying to find similar stories like that around you, so that you can just get the point across, right? But yeah, the most important thing I would say is just understand that all of these things are connected. And once you really start being aware of them, and you start being aware of, oh, this situation is kind of lot like this situation, and the lesson that we can take away is this. And so once you keep doing that, it's gonna become automatic. So you don't even have to really worry about, oh, is this my personal story versus yeah. And I guess, like, that's also why I think it's so important that every story you tell, you sit and you think about, what is the point of this story? Because a lot of people just tell a story and they're like, oh, it's a cool story, it's an entertaining story, oh, it's a really relatable story, it's and yes, the story itself could be good too, right? But what we really need to do is, like, what is the point of this story? What lesson does this story teach, right? And so I always try to figure out, okay, what is the lesson here? Because then you can finish the story. Otherwise, you're going to tell a story and you're gonna tell this amazing story, and at the end of the story you're like, oh yeah, and that's kind of what happened, and I don't know where I was going with this, I don't know what I was trying to say, but that I just wanted to say that story. And everybody's like, huh? Like, okay, cool story, bro. But the thing is, if you tell a story and at the end you said, what I learned is blah blah blah, and you say a lesson, right? Or the lesson of this story is that that most people are not driven by hope but by fear. So when you write your copy, make sure that you touch on people's fear, not just hopes. Okay, so I'm actually delivering an advice or tip or some sort of a lesson through the story. So that's how you can, if you end the story like that, when I do that, people are not going to be like, oh, Son is such a fucking preaching motherfucker and he's always preaching. Like, people are not going to do that. Do you know what I mean? Okay, let's keep going. Lokimon asked, what analogy would you give to describe the difference between Reels, TikTok, and Shorts? That's a good question. Like for me, I guess first I would have to think about I haven't thought about this, so this is me live. You're seeing my thinking process. The first thing I would have to do is I have to look at Reels, TikTok, and Shorts. Like, what's the difference, right? Like for me, Reels is like, I feel like what people like in Reels, like I only see on Reels, those beautiful footages of like drone footages of like nature and like cool buildings or cool shots, or people doing those like cool street photography, those kind of really visually stunning stuff. I see a lot on Reels, right? I feel like people on Instagram are a little bit more superficial. They care a little bit more about aesthetics. They care a little bit more about like, a nice, like it's kind of like they care a little bit more about artistic, things like that. So people in like I associate Reels and Instagram to almost like, if you're in New York City, I would associate that with like maybe Upper East Side or Upper West Side, or like if I'm in California, I would associate that with like Santa Monica, right? Those neighborhoods that are kind of like, a little bit like, um, you know, I guess upper middle class, where there's a lot of Starbucks, a lot of people wear Lululemon, and they drive Porsche Cayennes, and that type of neighborhood is what I'm picturing, right? When I think of TikToks, I think of like TikTok as like the hip, the Gen Z, the hip kind of weird, right? So maybe like I see them like, a bunch of skaters like hanging out at the park, or maybe something like that, right? And then when I think of YouTube as like maybe some of the intellectual types, right? Like, so the people that are like, talking about like, bro science and shit like that, right? That or people that might talk about like science when they don't know shit about science or something like that, right? So I guess what I would look at is I would try to, that's what I feel like, right? If I look at the different platforms, I look at the people on it, I look at what works well with what kind of content works well. Um, it feels kind of like that. So that's the analogy that I would use. Like I would say, hey, these different platforms, you can't just take one video and one content and hope that it'll work across all the platforms, because these different platforms have different personalities, right? So if when you're on Instagram, that's like, oh, that's like me going into Santa Monica to some, to a brunch party with, bunch of like, Upper East Side moms, and you know that's where I am, right? With this, I'm at a skater park with a bunch of these kids, right? With this, like I'm in different settings, right? And depending on where I am, okay, see, talking through this actually gave me an idea. Here's the content that I would make about that. So I see a lot of, here's the myth, right? I see a lot of people think that, oh, I have a good content, so it's going to work on social, it's going to work on Instagram, it's going to work on TikTok, and it's going to work on YouTube, right? That's what most people are thinking. But imagine that you and it's authentic to me. I'm just being authentic. I'm just being myself, right? But imagine you're trying to show somebody, let's say you're trying to show somebody how to use ChatGPT, right? Now, if you were trying to explain how to use ChatGPT to an 8-year-old child, would you explain it the same way as if you were talking to a 30-year-old IT person who works in tech? And would you say it the exact same way if you were to talking to your grandma who doesn't really know how to use computers? Depending on who you talk to, even though you're saying the same thing, you're going to say it completely differently, right? Like, if you're not going to go to that 30-year-old IT person and be like, and talk to him like a child. Hey, so this is a phone and all of these are icons. Can you say icons? Yeah, good, icons. Like, you're not going to talk like that to a 30-year-old guy, right? But you might talk like that to an 8-year-old child, right? So it's the same thing. Like, depending on the situation, depending on who you're talking to, you switch the way you talk, you switch how you talk, how you deliver it, your mannerism, everything, right? And that's kind of how these different platforms are. Depending on which platform you're on, you have to change your mannerism, you have to change the way you talk so that you can, so it translates to that audience. So that's kind of how I would see. Right there, you just saw a live example of my thought process of how I would take something and turn it into analogies. So I guess the real answer here, I guess the short answer is this. When you try to come up with analogies, when you try to like connect the dots between two analogies, don't force it. Don't try to be like, okay, what is the TikTok and what don't try to do it logically. What you should do is, okay, once you know, like, okay, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, right? Now sit back and just feel it. What does it feel like? And then try to find another example where it feels similar. So these analogies are not like, I can't just map it out like scientifically. What you have to do is you have to feel it out. And that's what makes it so hard. That's why I think storytelling is so hard. I think that's why connecting the dots is so hard, because you really have to be in touch with your emotions and see like, okay, what does this emotions feel like, right? And in what other situation have I also felt that? Okay, this is gonna be, there's a good question here. So the next Night Owl Nation we're in week 5 right now, and it goes 11 weeks. So the next Night Owl Nation will start in 8 weeks. So just under 2 months. Okay, last question. I'm going to answer this one and that'll be it. Isadora Bello asked, I am starting a new business, social media for architects and designers. How can I add the storytelling to attract clients and visibility? I mean, that's a very broad question. Here's what I would do. First of all, to try to attract architects and designers, I guess it depends, but it's going to be hard for you to, because this is a B2B business, right? Architects and designers. So trying to attract them through social media is going to be very tough. The better way to get clients, if you're a service provider, right? If you're an agency, if you're a freelancer, and you're a B2B service provider, social media is not going to be the best use of time. It's kind of like, let's say I grow social media. It's going to be very rare that everyone that follows me is a designer. Do you understand what I mean? Social media, it's like, so you're trying to kill like that Confucius thing. You're trying to kill a fly with a cannon. It's like you're overdoing it, because in order to build your social media, it requires so much investment in time and energy, right? And what you get in return is not really going to be worth it. Because like if you build really a following in social media, you can do way more than just, targeting architects and designers. You can sell products, you have a platform, so you can, get paid for sponsored deals. There's so much other sources of revenue that comes with it, that I feel like it's just way too much work for what you're trying to achieve. The better way to do these kind of B2B service is not through social media, or maybe if you are going to use social media, use LinkedIn or through networking or word of mouth. That's the best way to do it. Now, how social media can help you is if you build credibility, if you build some sort of authority, right? So, I'm the person who all the other architects go to. I'm the person that, other marketers go to, or whatever it is, that can be helpful. But I'm going to tell you how I use storytelling in my own agency. Okay. So, what you want to do is you want to go back and think about all of the projects that you've worked on, all the things that you've done for architects, for designers, right? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to look at all of the projects that I've worked on for my clients, right? Whether it's social media, marketing, copywriting, whatever it is. And I'm going to try to pinpoint all the mistakes that I made, right? Because for me, for the past, 20 years that I've been doing marketing, I've learned so much. I've learned what works. I've learned what doesn't work, and all of those things, right? So one of the things that I learned is that in my business, right? If you're a web design company, if you're any kind of agency that makes website, here's a common thing that happens. Designer will design the website, right? Give it to the client, and the client approves it. They're like, okay, this is good. I like this. And then now it goes into coding, right? Now it goes into actual development where they're coding the design. And then it gets finished. And the final product, the final website is built, doesn't look anything like the original design. Like the original design is like perfectly aligned. It's fancy. It's very detailed. And then the final product looks kind of like a knockoff of the original design, because the programmer, the coder, whoever coded it, is not a designer. So he's not paying attention to like the perfect font sizing, the alignments, the colors. He's not paying attention and making it pixel perfect, right? And that's why it looks different than the original design. And this is a common complaint that I get when I talk to people who's made websites before, or clients who've hired people to make websites before, right? So what I do is, I've also had that experience in my company. Every time we hire developers and they code a design, it comes out all fucked up. It doesn't look anything like the design. So what I had to do was, I was like, no, that doesn't look anything like the design. They fix it. And they can't. They literally don't know how to do it, because they don't have the eye like a designer. So what I had to do is I had to start going in there, and I had to mark. If there's 50 different things that are wrong, he's like, hey, this font should be 12. Right now it's 13. Hey, this should be this color. Hey, here and here should be a line. Here there should be 15 pixel of spacing, not 20 pixels. And I would literally nitpicking every little detail of that design, and I'll send it back to the developer. And now the developer has to sit there and fix every single one of them, right? And then it comes back and it's still wrong. So now I have to nitpick and I have to do it all again. Okay. So I have to keep doing that over. And so back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And eventually he got it right. Right. And on the next project, it happens again. And it happens again. And it happens again. And what I realized is that in our company, when we hire a developer, we have to spend 3 to 6 months doing this back and forth and back and forth and back and forth with them to train them to a certain point so they don't do that. And that's something that we do at Night Owl and our agency that nobody else does. And that's the reason why when you look at our websites look so perfect. It doesn't look like something is broken. It doesn't look like it's 80% done, because we put all of our developers through this training of going back and forth and just making sure they understand the details of the design. And because of that, our websites are perfect. You're not going to have that problem. Okay. So what I did was this. I already know when clients come to me and I start talking to them, I already know what their worries are. I know that, oh, my worry is that my last designer just disappeared. My worry is that, oh, last time I approved the design, it was good, but when it was coded, it wasn't good enough. My worry is that last time we changed our website, our SEO, our Google ranking went down. So I already know all of the worries that my clients have. How do I know? Because I've been fucking doing this for 20 years. So I've seen it all. So because I know what their worries are, I can go back in my stories and I can pick out all of the times when I made that same mistake, and I know why that problem happens, and I know how to fix it. So I can tell a story about it, right? So I'll tell you this finally before we end the live. A lot of times what happens is we think that just by telling a random story, that I can change somebody's mind or I can get somebody to relate to it or something like that. But that's just not true. The reason, it's actually the other way around. The reason why I'm able to tell stories that convince people, the reason why I'm able to tell stories where, I can make it relatable, is because I've been through where they've been through, and I understand their pain. I understand their worries because I've been there. And because I've been there, I know how I fixed it. I know what I was worried about, and I know why it was happening, and I have a story around it on how I fixed it. You see? So it's not just about storytelling, it's about having the life experience. You have to have the life experience to have been where that person have been and to have solved that issue, right? And I think that's the part that a lot of people forget. And that's the reason why it's the reason why I'm so adamant about like these people who just read all the books and give all this advice, but they haven't actually experienced the problem themselves. That's why I think experience is really the best teacher, right? So that's why I'm telling you guys, in Night Owl Nation, part of what we're practicing is not just telling stories, but looking back in our own experience and seeing how we learned the lesson. Or did we learn the lesson? Or can we reflect to see what lesson we can learn from our past, right? So think of Night Owl Nation not as just a storytelling community or, writing or content creation. Think of Night Owl Nation. Night Owl Nation is really like almost like a life coaching program. By joining Night Owl Nation and telling these stories and reflecting on your stories, what's going to happen is you're actually going to learn how to look at your own mistakes, what you're doing wrong, learn from them, and learn these life lessons actually, so that in the future you can share them as stories. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. Thank you for all the questions. If I haven't gotten to your question today, I'm coming back next week. So save your questions and maybe ask it in my Instagram stories. I put the chat, so ask in there, and I'll try to answer them in Instagram stories. Thank you, everyone. Have a great, great, great rest of the week and weekend. Bye. Cheers.